Hi, my name is Marcus and I'm here on behalf of Fracture Sounds to show you the third instalment from their free Blueprint series, Gentle Winds. Blueprint is a series of free instruments for the Kontakt 7 player that are inspired by experiments and passion projects that the Fracture Sounds team get up to. And in this instance, Gentle Winds is the R&D for a project that would later become Petrichor by Dan Keane, a stunning new library which has its own video on this channel. But for now, I'm going to be showing you through this free version, as well as showing you a piece of music so you can hear what it sounds like in context. Let's start with the controls. You've heard me playing around with it already, and this is just on the standard sustain articulation, which will loop infinitely for as long as you're playing. But I could switch over to swell if I'd like to, and that will give me individual notes with attack and release. High attack sounds like this. Long release sounds like this. And I can adjust both of these to create some undulating performances. I'm going to switch this back to sustain for the time being and reset the envelope. Over here on the left we have our primary source of volume control, which is the dynamics. This is controlled by CC1 or your mod wheel. And to the right we have this control called motion, which basically introduces some random variation to whatever dynamic you have it set at. To get the most out of this, you probably want to set the dynamics not all the way up, because that way they're only going in one direction. So I'm going to move this down to about the halfway point and turn this up and you'll hear what I'm talking about. Next we have the Fracture Sounds atmosphere. This solo button is quite welcome because it means that we can just listen to the atmosphere on its own. And if I turn down the atmosphere layer, we've now got the reverb that's built into this instrument. And if I just play the samples completely dry, here's what they sound like. And here's how the reverb sounds. If you want to make any changes to how this sounds, you can click the cogs here and change a couple of the parameters. Nice. And last but not least, if I go over to our settings tab by pressing these cogs, we have the option to change the dynamic range of the instruments. This is the volume, as in audible volume difference between the loudest and quietest samples. So if I have it all the way up, the volume between the loudest and the quietest samples is going to increase. If I bring it all the way down, they will sound audibly more or less the same volume. There we have it. That is the instrument in its entirety. What I'm just going to do quickly is bring up low winds in the Petrichor library, and you can kind of hear how that instrument became what is now this full library. Petrichor definitely has more of an airy kind of sound in the wisps feature, whereas Gentle Winds focuses more on a reedy saxophone kind of vibe, which I think suits more modern contemporary kind of fusion pieces. Speaking of which, I will now play you through my new piece of music that I did for the Fracture Sounds trailer, which focuses on Gentle Winds but also has a whole bunch of Fracture Sounds' other libraries, so you can hear what they all kind of sound like in context. So I started with 3 instances of gentle winds in this project. I began with the chords, which you can see here I've added some compression and delay to, and the delay has got a high pass filter, which basically means that we're only getting the sort of breathy air of the instrument coming through in the delay. The actual instrument itself I have put a little bit of the motion into so that as I brought the dynamics up there would be a bit of variation too. And the atmosphere is fairly high, but I did turn down the reverb. I think mostly in this piece I only used the reverb built into Fracture Sounds with a couple of minor exceptions and the instruments that weren't Fracture Sounds, but it's pretty standard otherwise, and this is what that sounds like. The second instance is an atmosphere layer where I made use of that delightful solo button. I also pitch shifted this one up 12 semitones, which created a really fascinating sound. It almost kind of sounds like a choir. And then my third instance was a melody, which plays this at the end. With this, I really wanted to bring out that reedy kind of sound. So you can see I've added this very modest EQ, which basically brings up the mids and the treble so you can really hear that breath and the sound of the reed coming through. So that's gentle winds. I'll show you the things, first of all, that aren't Fracture Sounds, one of which is the strings. Very bog standard ostinato-y stuff, but you can hear it's going to go into a solo violin now. And to add a bit of dynamism to the piece, I recorded some vocals. These maybe aren't my finest work. I think I did each one in like a take. This is what that sounds like. I don't think I'd put these in front of the rest of the instruments as a solo, but that was literally me with a coffee tin filled with some crap, which I just shook in front of a microphone. And then we have a cymbal, which I have just bounced out and put in reverse. Let's now move on to the Fracture Sounds libraries I used. I went to town a bit when it came to Zen. 6 tracks, all of which are doing kind of percussive-y things, with the exception of the Tan Pura. We've got the tabla, which has a bit of a high pass filter on it because I didn't really need any of the low frequencies. And then I used the wine glass finger hits as a sort of super high frequency hi-hat, which I have on loop quite quietly. You don't really hear the notes in the piece, it's just more that sort of that tapping sound. I did turn up the scatter though to introduce some variation so they pan around a bit more as the piece is playing. Next I used meditation chimes for a bit of high frequency glistening sounds, a bit like a triangle. They're kind of used to accent the climax of the piece where they come in. It just widens the panorama, I guess, of the piece of music, like having really ultra high frequencies as well as the bass. Bamboo chimes, I had to get these in there. I mean, come on, who doesn't love a good... I think I said earlier I had 6 Zen instruments, but it turns out I only have 5. I just put a blueprint in here as well because it's also green, I guess. Here are the green head chimes, also contributing to the percussion. Let me now go to the keyboards that I've used, starting with the Midnight Grand. I've turned the colour all the way down on this because this is providing like a counter ostinato and also a bit more of that percussive sound where we only really want to hear the actual key strikes as opposed to too much of the harmonics. That's basically how that sounds. A really nice dark sounding piano for doing a counter melody like that. Next is the Spotlight piano, which I have set to the big body preset. This is what that sounds like. Followed by the Dulciano, which is playing some textural rolls. I really like how this instrument sounds close mic'd. I think I said that in the piano comparison video. And you can see that I've also brought the colour right down just because I think it made it sound a little bit smoother and less baroque, I suppose. and I extended the release time by just adding a bit of stereo delay. Very cheesy. It also increases the stereo width a bit. And then finally, I got the electric keys in. There wasn't room for this to play in its regular capacity, but like I did with the walkthrough video for it, pitch shifted it down 36 semitones to use as a fat bass sound. Finally, we have our percussion section, which is comprised completely of Tom Factory. The first instance of which is this track called Cheesy Clacks, which is not only drenched in as much reverb as I could within the plugin, but has also got this ridiculous 6-second reverb from Logic, which I have layered on top, basically to create this sound. You can hear that that's doing a whole lot for the piece there, so, it was well worth it. I then moved on to the low end, using the deep drum ensemble, focusing especially on the 3 kick drums. I started off with the extra large mix, and then it was just a bit too fat sounding, and so I wanted something punchier, and to do this I used the hype mix. I turned up the punch in the sculpt tool a little bit, tiny bit of ensemble stacking, and then I used the perspective slider to put emphasis on the close mics and really get those transients, and this is what that sounds like. And then to add a bit more of an epic element to the end of the piece, I brought in the rods and mallets from the XXL patch, which sound like this. I just really love the slap that you get from the low toms being hit by the rods. It's really, really good. And you can see that I really brought this out with the controls. I've added a bit of squash and saturation, and also went to town with the ensemble stacking just to make that larger than life cinematic sound. And then the final instance, which is again the deep drums, but this time it is the XXL. I think I wanted to emulate the kind of sound of a timpani roll, and so I brought up the ensemble size, went to town with it a bit to be honest, and then the looseness is turned up so that you lose some of the individual hits, and not only that, but I've also added a bunch of reverb. This is what that sounds like. It also plays a little bit on the outro too. That sounds pretty good, and that is the last track, so what a way to end the walkthrough. However, if you've enjoyed the sound of Gentle Winds and you would like to download it, you can do so for free. All you have to do is sign up to the Fracture Sounds newsletter, and it can be used in the free Kontakt 7 player, so no purchases required. However, if you feel like making a purchase, there are plenty of other walkthrough videos on this channel, including a walkthrough of the full Petrichor library by Dan Keane, the link for which can be found either above me or in the description, depending on what the team decide to do. And otherwise, thank you for watching my little walkthrough, and I will see you when I see you. Goodbye.